What is better? To have a movie that starts strong but ends weak, or a film that starts slow but ends incredibly? In the last couple of months, we've had two horror films made by YouTubers, or at least people most famous for being on YouTube. That being Chris Stuckman's debut, Shelby Oaks, and Markiplier's debut, Iron Lung. Well, debut if you don't count as online films made for many years before, but I digress. Both films have received some interesting responses from critics, with Shelby Oaks being highly controversial upon release, while Iron Lung in many ways has become immensely popular among Markiplier's core audience, but has struggled a little bit with critical response outside of that.
This movie sucks. Straight up, this movie is not good. Iron Lung, directed by Markiplier himself, is certainly one of the movies of all time, and I say that very sparingly.
Both films do a lot right, but both films do a lot wrong. Mainly the unevenness of both. But I find comparing them, I'm able to really put in words the thoughts I've had all this time about Chris Stuckman's debut. For those who don't know, Stuckman has been a critic for many years. He's been involved in film. This movie had many professional actors in it, including Keith David. It had the influence of Mike Flanagan, one of the greatest horror directors of all time. He was a producer and early champion for Stuckman. This movie had a neon release, so it was, while independent, still had a distributor that was pretty significant. Meanwhile, Markiplier self-funded Iron Lung. It's an adaptation of an independent video game that's about sitting in a submarine submerged in blood, and you're mostly spending your time just, looking at numbers, taking still shots of the outside of your submarine. And yet, Iron Lung feels different. It feels significant. It feels important both to Markiplier's career as a creative, as well as the landscape of horror. And yet, the fact that outgrossed Melania, the documentary about the First Lady, is always fun and entertaining to see happen. But there's more to it than just that. Why is Iron Lung celebrated despite its flaws, while Chris Stuckman's film, with its flaws, is seen as a failure? Why do I feel the urge to revisit Iron Lung immediately, but less so to revisit Stuckman's debut? And yes, I'll be upfront right away. If you want to know which one's better, Iron Lung is better, by a mile. But why is that? What about Iron Lung succeeds, where Stuckman, the guy who studied film for so long, where does that misstep? Let's start at the beginning, or rather, the best part of Shelby Oaks and the worst part of Iron Lung. Well, Iron Lung is a cosmic horror film set in a foreign, strange, isolated world. Shelby Oaks takes place in the modern day, and as such, it draws heavily from tropes we've seen in other horror films. It starts with a pseudo-mock documentary about a disappeared YouTuber, and they're interviewing the YouTuber's sister, and this culminates in a scene where they get a knock at the door. In comes a stranger who decides to, shall we say, massage the interior of his skull with a clip. Inside of his hand is a tape from a camera that was used to film the final video this YouTuber, before she went missing, produced. And thus the mystery begins. What happened to Mia's sister? What happened to the production? What's going on at Shelby Oaks? And why there's so many dogs howling in all these scenes? Meanwhile, Iron Lung takes place in a post-apocalyptic future, where all the stars in the sky have at once died. The only remnants left are the phantoms of these stars, the dying light that has yet to reach our eyes. Markiplier plays Simon, a convict who is given an option to escape sentencing for some crime we have a vague understanding of throughout the whole film. Take a submarine that's sealed and welded shut to a moon covered in an ocean of blood and find something. What he finds is eldritch. Iron Lung starts very slow. We're getting a handle of what's inside the submarine, how things are, what everything looks like, how the machine functions, and it's all well and good. We get a sense of how the camera he uses to detect what's around him, how that works. We get slow hints that there's something else there. At first think it's a skeleton, until we realize the camera he's using incorporates X-rays to scan the area, meaning that skeleton that's now in a different location than it was before probably has some meat on those bones.
Beautifully. Oh!
Meanwhile, with Shelby Oaks, we get this opening that feels reminiscent of another horror film. In fact, not just another horror film, but one of my all-time favorites. The opening of Shelby Oaks is heavily inspired by Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo is an Australian horror film from the 2000s that expertly tells a mystery. It tells the story of how a family deals with loss when their eldest daughter dies suddenly in a horrible accident. She drowns abruptly, and the son, who's a photographer, begins to see in his photographs what appear to be shades of his sister. Maybe it's pixels that look clumped together in an odd way, or maybe there's a ghost haunting their home. And through this, they experience and explore their grief.
One of those initial thoughts was like, hey, maybe there's like kind of a way that we can shoot a portion of this movie and be very budgetarily efficient. And in those pitches to some of those early producers to be able to reach out and say, hey, like, you know, we all kind of, a lot of us indie horror fans, we love the Lake Mungos of the world, the Neroys of the world. Can we make a movie that features that as well as traditional narrative, as well as found footage? And some of those early conversations were like, hey, you know, we can make like, you know, 20% of this movie for like a really good price and then save some money for this other portion of the movie. So that's how it kind of started, like trying to remove as many roadblocks as possible from getting a film made, because you're going to encounter thousands of those before you even, you know, get anybody to say yes to a script of yours or provide money.
But the difference with Lake Mungo and Shelby Oaks is that Lake Mungo never surrenders its conceit. It sticks with that pseudo-documentary format from start to finish. We talk to all the characters, they investigate, and through that investigation, we re-examine footage again and again and notice interesting oddities that open the door to more of the story.
We checked the tapes.
There was a ghost in our house.
We investigate along with the characters in the documentary, but it's being reported to us after everything's happened. Meanwhile, with Shelby Oaks, we start with a pseudo-documentary story, but once the abrupt end to the intro happens, we transition into more of a standard film. And now we watch as the sister tries to pick up the pieces to find out what happened to her sister.
And then it became, once as soon as like some of those conversations started happening, I love the idea of getting into a world that is mixed media, because our world is mixed media. I'm talking to you now through Zoom on a podcast. People will listen to it on their phones or maybe, you know, some other device. We watch YouTube and TikTok. We watch movies in theaters and on streaming. There is no one straight path towards all of our stories. We experience them in so many different ways. And since so much of this movie does involve people who were like in the sort of early years of the internet, and some of those early years of the internet's infancy and discovering how different stories could be told, in this case through YouTube, I really liked the idea of having cameras that were non-fictional, that the characters are aware of, and then cameras that are fictional, where they don't realize they're being watched. And a large portion of this movie is about a character that does not realize they've been watched for a very long time.
Problem is, along the way, we're given found footage. Okay, well now it's a found footage film, right? But unlike, say, Cannibal Holocaust, which starts as a movie before transitioning into a found footage film in the second half, we're always removed from the footage. We're watching Mia, watching a TV, and watching her sister through that TV. There are layers of division between the core action and the audience. Adding to this, there's often cutaways from the goriest bits. There's a particularly gruesome kill early on in the found footage that we don't really see, because what happens is we're taken away from it. They cut away from the footage to the reaction of the footage, and that kind of takes us out of the moment. We can't get invested if we know any moment now we might miss a key bit. It's better to have everything play out than not. There's a similar scene that happens in Sinister, where we see Ethan Hawke's character watching footage that's increasingly violent, and there's an abrupt cutaway at a key moment. But the problem is that scene builds tension. The scene plays out seemingly in real time. Whereas with Stuckman's found footage, we often feel like we're missing the key moments of each scene. We feel like we're jumping from the scares, but not that lull between scares that makes things feel more real and tangible. It's still an effective opening, but it's not as effective as it could be, and with each passing scene, it gets less and less effective. The movie starts to lose its steam when the investigation outside the found footage begins. We see Mia going around to places her sister used to go in her videos, and she looks around and sees mole on the walls, she sees a hellhound here or there, she sees the phantoms of this giant black demon. I realize saying that sounds wrong, but that's what she sees all around the place, and the investigation becomes this element where you're not really investigating, you're more like hopping from scene to scene to scene where something supernatural might happen, maybe, and we kind of have a sense of, okay, why are you going here? Why not ask the police? Why not give the police what you know? Have them investigate it. There's no reason why, and she gives an explanation why she doesn't want the police involved, but it's lackluster.
Why didn't you give it to the police?
I needed to see it for myself.
Meanwhile, with Iron Lung, we are stuck in one location, that being a submarine. We never leave the submarine, we're stuck there. We're not going anywhere else. So we get a lot of the boring minutia. We see Mark charting a course. We see Mark, I'm going to call him Mark. I know his character's name's Simon that we find out later, but it's Mark. It's Markiplier. He acts like Markiplier. He talks like Markiplier. It's Markiplier. We see him going around under this ocean of blood. We see him charting courses. We see him figuring out the machinery around him, looking around the sub, finding mysteries around him and hints at something more. We get teases for more going on. We have communications to the control group through the radio system. And as such, we become acutely aware of the space, almost to a fault. I think a big problem with Iron Lung is early on, we're stuck in one location. We're stuck there, and it might feel like you're dragging a bit. But that slowness anchors you. It keeps you rooted to the then and there of the scene, where there's always something happening. Because we're so stuck with Simon's character, we get to know Simon better, even though it is, again, basically just Markiplier.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and I'm very tired. I'm gonna go into the ocean. And I'm going to... Fuck. Lixie and roll it back. I don't know what I'm talking about.
As a result, we get to understand him. We like him. We root for him. Even though we don't know a lot about him, even though his motivation is very simple, to get this job done so he can finish his sentence and survive. Survival, getting away, and the vague hint of hope for the future. That's it. That's the only thing we need with him. It's very simple, very stripped down, but every scene can always be tied back to those motivations. Whenever he acts, we know this could be the thing that leads him to reach his goals. In theory with screenwriting, you always want to be where this character's action could realistically lead to the conclusion they seek. If the character wants to survive, their actions in one scene leads to that goal. With Shelby Oaks, that's not the case. Mia's actions don't always make sense. Why is she going to this penitentiary at one point in the film? It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really lead to the conclusion of all these scenes. It's like she has to go somewhere we've already seen, and it kind of leads nowhere. The scene where she goes to the jail cell that her sister happened to visit in the past, that we know was the jail cell to this guy who's involved with everything, it doesn't really bring her any closer to finding any clues. She doesn't learn anything. We don't get closer to the uncovery. We don't learn new elements. We just get a new scare. And that's weird, right? Throughout the film, we have a sense that we're removed from the core conflict and that Mia's actions don't bring us closer to solving the mystery. She sort of follows a trail of crumbs to the conclusion. And yes, I'm going to spoil both films shortly, so brace yourselves. Here we go.
Most of what works is front-loaded in the beginning. Like the first 35 minutes of this film, I was really enjoying it. I thought it was an interesting premise they were setting up. It's all found footage that I thought was done very well. And then after like the first 35-ish minutes of the movie, it then just falls into horror movie tropes and walks the same path millions of other horror movies have come through fucking fee-fi-fo-fumming and stomping around on. And it just becomes very underwhelming. It's disappointing given how effective I think the first 30-ish minutes were of getting you interested in what's going on here and invested in it.
With Shelby Oaks, we learn that the main character's sister was kidnapped by a cult that worships an incubus being a male sex vampire demon, basically. We realize that she's been held captive by a witch and her son for a prolonged period of time, and has been forcibly bred with the incubus to create a Cambion. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3, you know very well what a Cambion is, but for those who don't, it's basically like a devil, like a high devil creature. We know that when there's this ritual with a baby in a giant blood circle with a ritual going on, we know that baby is definitely a demon. Also, I want to add right now that she goes to the first stranger she sees in the abandoned town of Shelby Oaks and basically goes, "Have you seen my sister? Like, what is this, Silent Hill?
Have you seen a little girl?"
We find a sister, we find a new baby, all's well that ends well, right? And the main character did very little to find any of this. She's basically brought to the witch by a demon dog. She's brought to her sister by the witch, and then she's brought to the baby who's being magically enchanted by a combination of all the above. Obviously, the audience can figure out this baby is a demon, and the demon is still out there, and so the sister decides, I'm going to smother this demon child before fate intervenes. She falls out a window, hellhounds eat her, and we find out the demon is there all along and has control of the family now. Okay, yeah, predictable, simple, straightforward. Not a very effective ending, and we don't feel like the main character has led to this ending. She's guided to it. We get no sense of really who this character is. There's the implication she may want a child, because there's like a crib in the background and the witch brings up at one point, but it's not a strong point with the character. Her main motive is always to find her sister. A child feels incidental. Meanwhile, Iron Lung has a very different ending. Simon gets dragged all throughout the whole ocean. We find it as this giant monster that might be responsible in part for what happened to cause all the stars in the sky to disappear. There's information in a prior submersible that was sent down, because of course, Markiplier's not the first one. Spoilers for Iron Lung, the game as well. There've been multiple voyages to this place so far, and Mark's being lied to. It's basically a death sentence for him. But another voyage did uncover something. Maybe the secrets to how to reverse this great quiet rapture. And so Markiplier is tasked with retrieving the black box from the submarine to basically salvage everything. And he can do it by getting close to the machine, using the computer to download the data, and then when either Mark will come up with the data black box on his own, or he'll find a way to make it float back to the surface if the submersible gets damaged, which of course it does, spoiler alert. All the while, there is this gradual leakage of blood, and as the blood leaks into the submersible, it kind of overtakes the interior of it. We see the set we're familiar with gradually shift, and that creates a dissonance, a discordant element to the set and environment, using environmental storytelling to communicate the themes of cosmic horror. They're voices that talk to Markiplier from potentially dead prior explorers of this deep, and it kind of plays with what you perceive to be real. Because the movie is so centered in one location, these shifts to setting and these elements of surreal interaction with Markiplier feel all the more discordant. Because unlike, say, Shelby Oaks, where we're set in this world which is obviously supernatural in nature, we are uncomfortably familiar with what goes on in this submersible. So any change feels all the more drastic as a result. So when we get to the big cosmic Evil Dead-esque finale, it feels all the more grandiose because we've been moving so slowly that so much action feels extremely intense. The slowness adds to the finale's excitement, even though it is basically just an Evil Dead mania fest at the end, more reminiscent to Event Horizon's finale than necessarily Solaris, which I felt like it kind of had a lot of similarities to beforehand. Although it does owe a lot, I think, to the movie Underwater. Both films are movies about explorers of the vast depths of the ocean, where pressure plays a huge role in the fear, claustrophobia, tightness, and the awareness of cosmic entities just below the darkness at the bottom of the sea. That stuff's kind of cool, I think, and it's very neat and plays into how the film wraps everything up. Ultimately speaking, the ending of Iron Lung is extremely powerful because it plays with slowness, because it plays with our familiarity with Markiplier, with the setting. It takes the components of storytelling organically. In many ways, I think Markiplier's experience with video games plays into how Iron Lung succeeds. You see, a video game storytelling, especially Iron Lung storytelling, the game Iron Lung storytelling, focuses on environmental details. The plot isn't presented to you forthright, but rather presented through unlockables, presented through notes and things you can find along the way. It's told through environmental storytelling. Meanwhile, Stuckman's Shelby Oaks relishes in the Easter eggs, the reoccurring symbology. We see demon icons everywhere, we're kind of bombarded by it actually. It reminds me a lot of how when people saw Longlegs, the movie, and were so fixated on the hidden devils.
Did you know that in the horror film Longlegs, the devil appears in the background many times in the film? But you probably missed most of them, and in this video I'll show you every time the entity appears.
Or people watched Mike Flanagan's version of The Haunting of Hill House and saw all the little ghosts in the background.
Inspired by one of the greatest horror novels of all time, Shirley Jackson's book of the same name is naturally unsettling. Mike Flanagan, director of the series, is no slouch himself. He and the creative team went out of their way to stock the screen full of pale figures who surround our favorite characters. Whether we notice them or not, their presence freaks out our subconscious.
These Easter eggs, these indications of supernatural, rather than overt supernaturalness being presented to us. Chris Stuckman brought that to the forefront of his film. His film embraces that iconography. It's in conversation with those pieces. But the problem is that these pieces are supplemental. They are environmental storytelling details. In a video game, these are background things. You have to go looking for them. In Stuckman's world, it's up front. It's the thing we look for, front and center in the camera. As a result, it's less effective. The story leads us to these Easter eggs, rather than the Easter eggs being a background portion of the story. In fact, one complaint I've seen with Iron Lung that I agree with is that a lot of the lore is kind of hard to figure out. Even though it is this eldritch, post-apocalyptic kind of world, most of the world building is communicated through dialogue, and that dialogue is often hard to hear because it's on a deliberately staticky radio. You might hear what they're saying, but it's not clear to the audience unless you have subtitles or the script on hand what they're actually saying. And this actually works in the film's favor. Though it makes it hard to know what's going on, it makes you feel more cemented in Markiplier's present. It makes you really feel like you're rooted in this rickety, crappy little world where everyone kind of knows more than they are letting on. It might be frustrating from a world building standpoint, but it is good in an immersive standpoint. And indeed, what's so good about Iron Lung, even though you don't understand all that's going on because it's not communicated clearly by design, you are fully immersed in what's happening because you're centered on the actions of a singular character. Markiplier is always doing something. He's making decisions that feel logical in the moment. In fact, they feel clever. They're rooted in decisions you might make while playing a video game, when solving a puzzle. He's mapping out the uncharted territory based on if he's near a wall or what have you. He's figuring out how everything's laid out based on coordinates and all that. It's clever stuff. You can see the character's intelligent, but also because he's so limited in what choices he can make, there aren't so many options for him. You can't just go, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? The world isn't as wide open as it is for Mia in Shelby Oaks.
Why didn't you give it to the police?
I needed to see it for myself.
In that movie, the entire time you're asking, why the fuck are you going into the house that's covered in mold on your own? Why not call the police? There are so many other options, and the fact that Mia always takes the dumbest option, or the one that puts her in the most risk of harm, is kind of indicative of where the script goes. It's an idiot plot that only functions if the main character is an idiot. And added to that, so many of the scenes, we don't see the logic behind them. We see the conclusion of them. We see Mia go to a place. Why'd she go here? Well, she saw it in a video. Okay, but why did she go there if she just saw it in the video? You know, see what I mean? She saw the person who died in the scene and now she's going to talk to someone else who knew that person. Okay, why? You see, the problem is we don't get a clear sense of why each scene fits together where it does in the story, and as such, that takes us out of every scene she's in. The fact that Shelby Oaks is 90 minutes, whereas Iron Lung is over 2 hours, I think it's not best for either film. Shelby Oaks needs about 15 minutes more, and Iron Lung needs to lose 15 minutes. I think it goes on for too long there, and it goes on too short in Shelby Oaks. The connective tissue, I think, would really do a lot to make the scenes flow better, and allow us to get to know Mia better as a character. Maybe her decisions make more sense if there's more material for us to watch. I don't know. Meanwhile, with Iron Lung, I do think there's scenes that drag on for too long, even though they do get you immersed in the mundanity of being in an iron submersible like this. I don't know. I don't know what I would cut. Maybe like trim seconds off each scene. But I digress. But it goes without say, both are accomplishments. Both are good. I don't know if Shelby Oaks deserved to be lambasted as hard as it did when it came out, even though I'm very critical of the movie. I don't care for it. I think it is indicative that Stuckman has a lot to learn as a filmmaker. I don't agree with his choice to not stick to a format. Markiplier, for whatever faults Iron Lung has, stuck to his guns. He made a single location horror film, stuck in a tight confine, without ever escaping those confines. Shelby Oaks starts as a mockumentary, becomes a pseudo-found footage film, and then in the last half, just becomes a standard horror film. That's like The Ring. It's an investigation film without the investigation part. It's like you're jumps from scenes, basically. It feels flat. Is Iron Lung the greatest horror film made by a YouTuber? By no means. And no, Marble Hornets isn't either. I know you're going to say that one. Nah, Marble Hornets is great and all, but it's not a movie. It's not the movie I'm thinking of when I think of a YouTuber horror film.
Talk to me.
That would be Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. These are two of the greatest horror films made by a YouTuber I've ever seen, and through the comparison between Shelby Oaks, Iron Lung, and Talk to Me, I think you can see where these films succeeded, whereas these two had issues. Talk to Me and Bring Her Back were made by Raka Raka. The YouTuber's Raka Raka, famous for some very intense sketches, we'll say. What these films do so well is they're a perfect blend of character and disturbing material. Both do have that kind of otherworldly world building that's very esoteric, much like Iron Lung. But I think they have more in common with Shelby Oaks in that they are about people trespassing on the supernatural in our world, showing the interplay between worlds. But they're also centered on real stories, centered on character. At no point does the world become the focus. It's always on character. And that's where Shelby Oaks, I think, failed. Each character's decision in Talk to Me and Bring Her Back, even if they're self-destructive, even if they're painful, come from human desire, grief, the desire to change horrible things that have happened outside our control, even if that means hurting other people, or perhaps succumbing to peer pressure for just a bit at the wrong time. But one reason why they don't feel slow at any points, like either of the other two films, is the horror is spread throughout. Iron Lung, for all of its merits, only gets really disturbing or frightening, I guess you can say, at the very end, and I find that more fun than anything else. The gory, grotesque stuff, it's all at the end of the film. Meanwhile, Talk to Me spreads fear throughout. There is a palpable sense of terror from start to finish, and much like Shelby Oaks, it starts with a great horror opening sequence, one that feels unique, one that immerses you in this world of adolescence and the supernatural. Bring Her Back also plays with different formats of storytelling. It starts with recorded footage that then transitions into tangible, normal cinematic language. But it doesn't feel as abrupt as with Shelby Oaks because we understand this is footage that inspires the actions of what is to come. It is supplemental, it is not too long, it doesn't overstay its welcome, but it communicates the haunting horror of playing with that which should not be played with. And it also reoccurs throughout the film in the background as kind of diegetic visuals. These two films are the pinnacle of what YouTubers can do when given a cinematic budget. And it's fantastic. I think both of these films are superb and absolutely worth revisiting. What do I see in the future for both Stuckman and Markiplier? Well, here's the thing. Both of their films have succeeded at the box office. You might not like Shelby Oaks, but it made back its budget and then some. So it's a success, and he probably will get more opportunities to come to make film. And I hope he listens to feedback because I think he has a lot of potential. I don't think he had the right sensibilities with his script. I don't think he had faith in the formats he was playing with because I thought it worked really well when it was more like Mungo. But unfortunately, he diverged from that. He made it more traditional. I know that when Neon helped distribute the film and when Mike Flanagan jumped on board, there were some added budget to the project that allowed him to flesh out more scenes with effects. I can only assume at the big demon creature in certain scenes, which I feel I don't know. I could have done without that. I don't think it was really needed. But also, it did add to the certain scenes. It's a good visual, I guess. I don't know. I think demons are kind of lame sometimes, from the big horned monsters. At least with Iron Lung, you have this unholy abomination, that which you don't understand what it is, or even if it's actually the thing at fault for everything, or maybe something that's been produced by this whatever's going on. It's kind of hard to say, and that lack of knowing makes it better. With a demon, we know what it is. It's a demon. It's a biblical demon. It's an incubus. But the elder, the abomination, the eldritch, that's interesting. That's unlike anything else. And even with Talk to Me and Bring Her Back, the afterlife becomes this bleak abyss of mystery, of the unknowable. And that's really effective stuff. We don't really know what goes on in that depth beyond it feeling like this overstuffed purgatory, this nightmare shadow world of suffering and misery. That's effective. That's good. It's unusual and plays with visual language very well. By maybe not telling us all the rules, it works better. And I do think Markiplier's video game experience helps here a lot. With a video game, you have to be thoroughly engaged with what's happening, even if the task is minuscule, like a repetition cycle of going to a room, opening a door, looking at something, this, that, and the other. Even if it's that simple, it keeps you engaged. And engagement is so vital, even through a slow beginning. If the audience is engaged, they can watch the rest of the story. Stuckman, I think, approached Shelby Oaks cinematically, but as a result, he forgot the key element. How does an audience stay engaged with the action on screen? If he can figure that out with his next film, I think he'll do a lot better, as well as not trying to do too much. It's better to keep a film anchored to a specific style, a specific setting, a specific character, rather than hopping around and trying to do too much. We don't get a sense of who Mia is because we're jumping around too much, and that's a problem. But likewise with Markiplier, what can he do better? Well, I'd like to see him expand the scope of his next project, work outside of just a single location. He now has the clout to get more money for his projects, so maybe he can have more people involved. We know he's done more people before with his other projects, with his various YouTube videos that he's done, with lots of characters and all that. So hopefully his next project will be able to play with a larger playing field. At the end of the day, I'm just happy to see independent creators make material like this. We have a lot of movies that come out every year that feel generic and simple. Amazon, for example, this month alone released Mercy and Melania, two films that I think are two of the worst already in 2026. A pro-AI, pro-law enforcement propaganda piece, and a movie about the First Lady. It's very disappointing seeing both these films come out so early, but also they're not very good, and audiences aren't watching them. So it's not just me saying they suck, it's the general reaction saying it sucks. Whereas these independent projects, even when they fail, I find they're interesting to talk about. I'd rather talk about Shelby Oaks than the Melania documentary, because that's a boring failure. Meanwhile, Shelby Oaks, even if you hated it at least got a conversation starting about storytelling in film, about YouTubers transitioning into filmmaking, and more. It's a failure, in my opinion, from a story perspective, but it is an interesting opening for more stories from a creative I think has a lot of potential.
But it's always been interesting food for thought. What would happen if a movie critic actually did make a movie themselves? What would that look like? Would it be good? And this is the first, to my knowledge, at least to this scale, of that very phenomenon happening.
I don't know. I just don't think he did well with this one. But there's next time. And with Markiplier, well, it's Markiplier. What do you expect? He's always going to do something interesting. I think that it's a possibility now that more creatives might take the leap from YouTube to cinematic storytelling, and that might be really cool. Or it could lead to some very interesting failures. Time will tell.
Thank you everybody for watching. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!